All right, welcome back to Cape Town. Apologies for that. Plenty on the go as we continue our build up to the State of the Nation address. A number of people who are still crisscrossing the precinct, not too far from the Cape Town City Hall. That's where President Cyril Ramaphosa will, of course, deliver that all-anticipated speech at around 7 p.m. We heard from the Water and Sanitation Minister a short while ago, who essentially is giving government's response to what is already deemed a water crisis in parts of Johannesburg. Certainly not a new issue to communities around the country. But let's get an expert take on what is actually taking place and what it'll take to fix it. My next guest is Gundo Maswime, who is an infrastructure analyst who wears many hats and is with us here at the SABC News Channel. Good to see you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for your patience. Often at least the problem around the provision of water has been framed as South Africa's a water scarce country. It's consumers who need to reduce their consumption, and that's why we're seeing that essentially supply and demand aren't correlating. Is that a proper diagnosis of the issue?
To an extent, that is a proper diagnosis of the issue. But maybe to demonstrate it better, if we take a miniature version of the water network, let's take a special economic zone, which is where I'm currently working in the Musina special economic zone. When you supply the water, when you build the water network, you need to account for all the pipes. What type of pipes are they? What size are they? What condition are they in? Where are they at? And when you have that, you are now able to know, when you have a digital twin, if there are pressure issues, what the issue is. Yes, we are ranked number 30 in the world as amongst those water scarce countries. But we have not reached that critical stage where the limitation is the water balance, as in the availability of water in the country itself. Our limiting factor right now is the infrastructure, and the minister is right to say the bulk water is applied in the right quantities. It is in the reticulation where most of our challenges are.
Yeah, and it's at that stage we're told of what's called non-revenue water, leaks for the ordinary South Africans. Do we have a good grasp of just how bad the situation is on that front before we can speak about what it will take to ultimately solve that issue?
Yeah, we are able to tell because there's an abstraction point from the bulk water. For example, the supply from Rand Water, they have a meter. They can determine the amount that they have supplied to City of Johannesburg or any municipality for that matter. But then based on that, the amount that they can bill consumers for versus the amount that's unaccounted for, that is what then tells us how much water is being lost in the system, because that is water that does not translate into revenue. So it's when that figure rises that first the municipalities are not able to make any profit from the supply of the water service. But secondly, you find that as much as we can increase the supply, there is a point where the infrastructure is so dilapidated that we are not going to be able to match the leaks. And I think in some ways, in most places across South Africa, because we don't know where the infrastructure is, we don't actually have the digital maps for the full water infrastructure. That is what we are unable to manage. That we cannot manage what we cannot see.
That is stunning, and I'm just going to repeat that in case it just went over people's heads. We don't know where the infrastructure lies. How then do we know what it'll take to solve the problem if we don't even have a map of where the pipes are running and where therefore there's a need for attention?
Yes, so we don't know the extent of our network. We don't know whether the pipes are on this side of the road or on that side of the road. Well, in some areas the maps are there. But in many areas they are not. Remember the redetermining of boundaries in 1999 when local government started. Most of the drawings, if not all, they were on paper. The very few places had the digital drawings. So with the demarcation, some went into the wrong offices and so on, and people sat with papers and they discarded them. So now, in the smaller cities, there were old men that knew exactly where each water pipe ran, because their whole life they would have seen the evolution, the expansion of the water network. But when they are not there, and our cities have now, our towns have now expanded as well. We have got drawings for maybe the new infrastructure. That's where we have the digital drawings. So it's not easy to manage what you cannot see. You cannot manage what you have not seen.
Fair enough. You know, it's interesting because despite what you've just mentioned, the minister has come out to, I think, throw a figure around an estimate of what it will take to ultimately fix these infrastructure issues. If we don't have the full extent of the mapping, then the next question is, what is she basing her figure on?
Yeah, we will probably want to believe it's an extrapolation of what could be there, but the exact figures will be known when we know what condition are the pipes in. Because if the condition is not too bad, you use less amount of money. For those that are in a state where they have reached their design life, the amount of money you use is more. So if we are not able to make differentiation between those that have maybe an accidental leak from an external force, and those that are leaking because they are old, if we cannot see the extent, the difference, what type of pipe is it, because if it's a clay pipe or you are using light pipes of HDPE pipes and so on, the prices are different. Even the replacement amounts are different. Others are steel pipes. So to put a figure around, as you say, that is a conservative estimate. Yeah.
Right, Kundu Masume, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really do appreciate it. An infrastructure analyst with us here as we continue with our rolling coverage of the State of the Nation address, or at least the build-up to that moment. There's a number of other people, of course, that we've spotted for you who are also here to give a bit of insight in the lead-up to 7 o'clock when the President is going to speak. So much being said about the state of our economy, and it's a good way, I suppose, to bring in our next guest, Kim Silberman, who's an economist, no stranger here at the SABC News Channel. Lovely to catch up with you again 12 months later, and the wind is still unrelenting.
Yes, February in Cape Town, and we've got the budget to go through like this as well.
Exactly. So let's speak about the state of South Africa's economy. A lot of headwinds, we're told, along the way, so to speak. Well, let me start here. There was a lot of attention on this concept of inclusive economic growth. I mean, it's one of the 3 priorities that the President spoke to just yesterday. And I don't know about, maybe it's just me, but it always feels like such an elusive concept. I don't even know how you measure it.
Well, I think maybe one thing I can highlight, and maybe it doesn't get highlighted enough when we talk about the economy, is the amount of sexual harassment and abuse that goes on in schools. And I think that if we want women to take part, and men, to take part in the economy in an empowered way, that is something that we really need to start to deal with, because if you're living in a state of trauma and disempowerment, it's very difficult to contribute to the economy, especially when you're scared of going to school.
Wow, I don't think many of us think of it in that way. Often there's talks of the kind of economic growth we'll need for us to start noticing at the very least. I think the figure was around 3%. If you want to start clawing back at the unemployment numbers, we're very far from that point.
Yes, I think we are, and I think things like the foot and mouth disease is a huge impact on everybody in the economy, on our food security, and I suppose as an economist I can say on inflation. And we're going to see that feed through into milk prices, beef prices, at the dairy chain, and all of that means that the Reserve Bank can't lower interest rates, so that feeds on into our disposable income and the amount that people can spend. So I mean, I'm no expert in the political arena, but I'd like to hear what the President has to say about what's going on with our farming, and specifically why we are being faced with this catastrophe.
Yeah. It's what sociologists called a very intersectional take on the economy. And I'm still kind of reflecting on your first response around how harassment is actually very closely linked to the concept of inclusive economic growth. And I wonder, in the meetings that you have, whether you reckon that kind of lens receives enough attention. You know, we always see the economy as this thing that exists in a silo, but often when there are other parts of our society that don't work well, the economy pays the price, excuse the pun.
Yes, that's true. There are some organizations that I think can be better funded, like the Budget Equality Coalition, that is bringing this to people's attention, and specifically people within budget. And just speaking about the budget, I was looking at some of the stats. We had 300 billion in wasteful expenditure last year, and we only spent 280 billion on social grants. So that, I think, puts in perspective why you're seeing so much anger from South Africans, and why the SONA is starting to appear as though there's a lot being said, but every year we wonder why more is not being done.
Fair enough. Very sobering indeed. Kim Silberman, that's the time we have. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. I have no doubt you and I will catch up very soon, not only here for the State of the Nation address, but also for the budget, of course, expected in a couple of weeks' time. Kim Silberman is an economist as we continue making sense of the expectations, perhaps the insights in the lead up to the State of the Nation address. Once again, coming up at 7 o'clock. It is the 9th for President Cyril Ramaphosa, the 4th here at the Cape Town City Hall, and of course the 2nd under the Government of National Unity. I do spot somebody else that we're trying to speak to, and we're going to just try and usher her in as well to continue capturing some of those sentiments. Her name is Merlise Jogiet. We tried to practice earlier on, and here I am still. Perhaps you can introduce yourself. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Merlise Jogiet.
Not bad.
I'm the Operations and Advocacy Manager at Women for Change.
Right. So important, especially considering the fact that gender-based violence in the lead up to the G20 summit was declared a national disaster. It was at the social summit, which took place in Boksburg. And the first question is, did that go far enough? I mean, it might be a bit too soon, but have you noticed any change in how government is responding to the scourge after that classification?
Look, I think we're familiar with how the government operates, right? We hear a lot of rhetoric around things changing, how they're going to implement stuff, and then we wait. So we're in the waiting process right now. We're 2 months after the classification happened, and we've yet to see any meaningful change or any direction towards what change is going to look like.
Sure. So with that in mind, what do you want to hear today, insofar as that is concerned? So much has been said.
We're hoping to hear how women and children are prioritized in South Africa. We had to fight very hard to get this classification. We had a petition that had over 1 million signatures, which is almost unheard of in this space, right? That means that the people actually want to see meaningful change. We got the classification, but no roadmap to how that is even going to be implemented. Even in our meetings, there isn't much feedback on what's going to happen. And we want to understand how civil society and how corporates are going to be involved in the actual implementation of this. But there's been a lot of talk around things like the NSP and the council that we don't really know what is happening and what isn't. So we want clarity. We want clarity, we need a roadmap, we need to understand how much money is going to be put in place for both the classification and the NSP so that we know how it's going to impact the work that we do.
Yeah. Would you say it's a money issue? I mean, is gender-based violence and the response to it an actual money issue, or is it more nuanced than that?
It's a lot more nuanced, but I think it starts with the money. The problem is the organizations who actually do this work are not funded adequately. We don't have the resources, and we're creating the solutions for gender-based violence that are not actually being used in the government when they put things like the NSP in place. So it starts with the money, but then it also starts with who is put in place to run these systems. We have no clarity on that. We have things like the bail conditions that change in 2022. That's not being implemented, which is a simple thing to do. We don't understand what the backlog is and why we're not being told what that outlook is or what's going to happen next.
Sure. Well, we'll all be watching very closely at 7 o'clock. Merlise, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate your time. Merlise Jogiet is with Women for Change, the activists that are here. Really, I suppose, giving us a snapshot of this cross-sectional representation of the people who'll be listening to the president, all the way from ministers to activists that are present and experts listening very keenly for what the president will say as he lays out his own game plan, for lack of a better term, for the year ahead. Mpho?
Very well. Thank you very much, my colleague Ayanda Nyathi there, giving us rolling coverage, all in the build-up to this evening's State of the Nation address, as we continue to bring you more. Stay with us.